What do we mean when we say these two are analytically separable? What do we mean by that? And the basic idea is as follows. In an ethnically plural, religiously plural, if you're using the ethnic term in its narrower version, let's use it in a broader version. In an ethnically plural society where freedom of expression is available, some conflict on identity-based cleavages is typically to be expected. Indeed, such conflict can mark both societies which allow freedom of expression and which are authoritarian. It could simply be that authoritarian or pluralist authoritarian societies push ethnic discontent under the surface, inducing long phases of peace only to erupt into all-consuming violence when authoritarian polities begin to liberalize or they are undermined. Right? So this is called a forcible curtailment of or coercive containment of natural ethnic conflict. Indonesia is a very good example. But what do we mean by natural ethnic conflict? If freedom of expression is available, then the following struggles are very likely. Which language should be used in schools and employment? A contentious issue in most multilingual societies of the world. Even in the West, for example, French Canada, that is Quebec, has never accepted English as a medium of instruction in its schools for its kids, nor in public employment. For example, in Spain, if you go to Barcelona as opposed to Madrid, Barcelona is in Catalonia, and increasingly the argument after authoritarianism ended there, when Franco's rule ended, and political liberalism was introduced and freedom of expression was given, Catalonia started talking about Catalan language being different from Spanish. Right? And a big argument began, though it's not as intense or as long-lasting and as institutionalized as in French Quebec, as in Quebec, French-speaking Quebec, not French Quebec, French-speaking Quebec. So, which language should be used in schools and employment? Another very typical issue, whether migrant groups should be allowed entry into the country of origin and or given restricted rights. Do the Muslims in Switzerland have the same rights as non-Muslim Swiss? Do the Tamils in Karnataka have the same rights as Kannadigas? These are universal issues. This is not something confined to Karnataka or to the other example that I gave. Whether different religious groups should be under one civil law for marriages, divorce, and property inheritance, or different religious groups should have different civil laws given by their religious codes. Right? This is a universal issue. Whether religious dress can be allowed in public spaces, a French issue, not an American issue. In American universities, I have repeatedly, invariably had young Muslim women wearing a hijab which is not allowed in France? Whether some groups should be given the benefits of affirmative action, how and to what extent? Should OBCs be given? This was a big issue for India, right? After the Mandal Commission report, 10 years after the Mandal Commission report. And then, not only should OBCs be given affirmative action, should it be for employment or also for education, which became an issue by 2005. Right? Whether allocation of public resources favors some ethnic groups more than others is a big issue in many, many polities. India, the United States are very good illustrations of how democracies frequently witness such conflicts. Democracy is no guarantee that ethnic conflicts will not flare up. Indeed, they might be part of routine politics. The conceptual issue then is whether conflict is violent or pursued within the institutionalized channels of the polity, within bureaucracies, while lobbying, through voting, through political mobilization, protests, strikes. These are forms of democratic politics, and these are conflicts. Right? When ethnic protest is channeled through parliaments, assemblies, bureaucracies, or when it takes the form of strikes and non-violent demonstrations, the highest form of which is civil disobedience, then it's conflict all right, but not violence. Such institutionalized conflict, which can be quite healthy for a polity, must not be equated with riots, pogroms, and civil wars. That's also a form of conflict. And here are the various forms of collective violence. I noted three. Riots, pogroms, and civil wars on which we have maximum amount of work. My own work is, a lot of my work is on riots, Hindu-Muslim riots. These are different from conflict per se, is the claim here, right? That's the conceptual distinction. And they are themselves different from one another, and we may want to spend a couple of minutes thinking about how riots are different from pogroms, are different from civil wars, are different from lynchings, are different from terrorism, for example. These are all forms of collective violence. Typically, in the field of ethnicity, we don't deal with what is ordinarily called crime unless it's a hate crime. And hate is driven by race or ethnicity. So if a white man kills a black man, and there are many such instances, then we do study that. Otherwise, normal crime, we don't. If a black man breaks into the house of a white man and kills the white man, and the reason is clearly racial, we study that. Right? But not what would be called ordinary crime. What we study most is riots, pogroms, and civil wars. Riots are defined as a civilian group clash. State neutrality may not be in doubt, but is not abandoned. In all riots of India that I studied, almost all riots, there was a claim by the community that suffered most violence that the state was not neutral. The state favored some group. That may be true, and that is quite often true, if not always true, but the principle of state neutrality is not explicitly dropped, which is what happens when you have pogroms. Pogroms are state-condoned or state-approved attack on a hapless minority. State neutrality is dropped as a principle. In India, the argument is that India has seen at least 2 pogroms. There are some others that might qualify. The anti-Sikh violence in 1984 in Delhi and anti-Muslim violence in Gujarat in 2002. Of course, Mr. Modi contests it was a pogrom. He says it was a riot that he tried to control, but a lot of people would disagree with that claim. Of course, very few, there is nobody I know, no serious scholar or even practitioner or I know who would not call the anti-Sikh violence after Mrs. Gandhi's assassination in Delhi just a riot. Civil wars are to be distinguished from both, even pogroms. Why? State neutrality is not only dropped, but state becomes a combatant in a civil war. It's not just condoning a group that is attacking another group. State is a combatant, and the minority is not hapless. Minority is also combatant, it's armed. It's not simply receiving blows, it's hitting back and hitting back vigorously. Sometimes more vigorously than is justified. Right? So these 3, and of course, the causes of these 3, there's a debate on whether the causes of these 3 are the same. I'm identified with the group that says the causes of riots are different from the causes of civil wars, an issue that will occupy 1 full day of the seminar later on in this week. And you'll see what my reasoning is. And I'll also give you reasoning of those who disagree with me. Finally, we have lynchings and terrorism as 2 very opposite kinds of phenomenon, but both are forms of collective violence. How is a lynching defined? Is lynching about killing a lot of people, or is lynching about killing very few, but by a lot? The latter or the former? The latter. That's exactly right. 1 or 2 or 3 people identified for whatever reason as deserving of collective punishment, not a punishment meted out by the state, which has legal rights to do so, right? But meted out by a community. Most lynchings, not most, a lot of lynchings in the world are highly ritualized affairs. They are festivals of violence. In the American case, the lynchings of every 3rd day of America, on every 3rd day in any given year between 1880 and 1930, a black man was lynched. Right? And Indonesia, which I study, has even higher rates of lynching. And it's a festival because the person is accused, this is a form of mob justice, if you will. The person who's accused of a crime is executed, and different forms of execution. These are very ritualized forms, and I did not personally witness, but in Kashmir, when I was working in Kashmir, in the hotel where we were staying in Srinagar, there were only 8 rooms taken out of about 200. This was 1990, when Kashmir insurgency was at its peak. 6 taken by the armed forces, paramilitary actually. 1 taken by a young scholar, me, and another taken by a journalist from Washington Post. So she went to Kupwara, or I don't remember where exactly, but Srinagar. I was working in Srinagar, and she described the lynching that she watched, which after the person was executed, pieces of his body were thrown, and people were playing football with it. Kids were playing football with it. That is the extent to which the body that was attacked was seen as a site of evil. Complete dehumanization. Right? And that site of evil had to be attacked and killed and cleansed. Right? So you had also festivals of violence in America. So that's lynching. A lot of people killing 1 or 2. Terrorism is 2 or 3 or 4 people killing a lot. It is a form of collective violence, but it goes the other way. And of course, it's high tech. Typically in lynching, it's always low tech. The highest form of the highest technological level it has achieved, lynching, is execution through a gunshot. But it's normally worse than that. It's much worse than that. Okay, so we will go into at least these three we'll have time to investigate later. But I just wanted to give you a conceptual, first of all, a conceptual distinction between conflict and violence, and then a conceptual distinction between various forms of collective violence that are studied in the field.